A woman with a queen mindset is not difficult to love. She is difficult to use. There is a difference. She can be warm without being endlessly available, generous without being easily exploited, loving without surrendering her standards, and compassionate without making excuses for behavior that repeatedly hurts her. What changes is not her capacity to love. What changes is what she is willing to sacrifice in order to receive love in return. At some point, she realizes that constantly proving her worth, explaining her boundaries, accepting inconsistent attention, suppressing her own needs, and giving unlimited access to people who haven't earned it are not signs of love. They are signs that she has been negotiating against herself. Carl Jung believed that psychological growth requires us to separate our authentic identity from the roles, expectations, and unconscious patterns that have shaped us. He called this process individuation. And when a woman begins that process, something fascinating happens. She doesn't simply start doing new things. She starts refusing old ones. Here are 5 things a woman naturally stops doing when she develops a queen mindset. The first is this: she stops auditioning to be chosen. Many women were quietly taught that love is something they must earn. Be agreeable, be understanding, be attractive. Don't ask for too much. Don't be difficult. Give another chance, and another, and another. Eventually, relationships can begin to feel like an audition. She isn't asking herself, do I actually want this person? She's asking, does he want me? That small shift changes everything. Because when your attention is focused entirely on being chosen, you stop evaluating the person doing the choosing. You overlook incompatibility. You rationalize inconsistency. You ignore the feeling inside you telling you something isn't right. Jung believed that much of human behavior is driven by unconscious material. Old wounds, projections, fears, and unmet needs operating beneath conscious awareness. So sometimes the desperate desire to be chosen isn't really about the person standing in front of you. It is about what being chosen would seem to prove: that you are lovable, that you are enough, that you finally won. But the queen mindset reverses the question. Instead of asking, does he like me? She asks, do I like who I become around him? Instead of asking, will he choose me? She asks, would I choose this relationship if I weren't afraid of being alone? And suddenly, she isn't auditioning anymore. She's observing. She's discerning. She's choosing too. That is the first shift. The second is one that can feel surprisingly uncomfortable at first. She stops over-explaining her boundaries. There is a strange thing that happens when a woman first begins setting boundaries. She often feels compelled to write a dissertation explaining them. She says no, and then gives 6 reasons. She declines an invitation and immediately explains why. She tells someone their behavior is unacceptable, then spends 20 minutes proving that she has the right to feel that way. Why? Because somewhere inside, she still believes her boundary requires approval. But a boundary that requires another person's permission isn't really a boundary. It's a negotiation. A woman developing a queen mindset begins to understand something uncomfortable. People who benefited from her lack of boundaries may not celebrate when she develops them. They may call her selfish, cold, difficult, different. They may remind her of the version of herself who used to tolerate more. And this is where individuation becomes difficult. Because becoming yourself sometimes requires disappointing people who preferred the version of you that was easier to control. Jung wrote extensively about the persona, the social mask we develop to function in the world. For many women, that persona includes being pleasant, accommodating, helpful, and emotionally available. There is nothing wrong with kindness, but kindness without boundaries eventually becomes self-erasure. The queen does not become cruel. She becomes clear. She learns that, no, that doesn't work for me, is a complete thought, and she no longer needs everyone to understand her decision before she honors it. The third thing she stops doing is perhaps one of the easiest traps to fall into. She stops confusing attention with devotion. Attention can be intoxicating. The messages, the compliments, the chemistry, the intensity. Someone thinking about you constantly can feel like intimacy, but attention and devotion are not the same thing. Attention is easy. Consistency is harder. Anyone can create intensity for a few weeks. Anyone can say beautiful things. Anyone can become fascinated by you. But devotion reveals itself through behavior over time. Does this person show up? Are their words consistent with their actions? Do they respect you when they are disappointed? Can they tolerate your boundaries? Do they care about your well-being when there is nothing immediately in it for them? A woman who has not yet developed discernment may become attached to potential. She sees who someone could become. She falls in love with glimpses. She builds a relationship with a future version of someone who has not actually arrived. And because the fantasy is so compelling, reality begins to feel like an inconvenience. Jung called this projection. We unconsciously place qualities, desires, and images from our inner world onto another person. Then we respond not only to who they are, but to who they represent inside our psyche. This is why some attractions feel almost supernatural. But intensity does not automatically mean compatibility. Sometimes the person who activates you most deeply is not your destiny. Sometimes they are revealing an unresolved part of you. The queen mindset learns to ask, what is actually happening here, beyond what I hope is happening? She watches patterns. She watches behavior. She lets time reveal character. And she stops mistaking someone's fascination with her for their capacity to love her well. The fourth thing she stops doing may be the one that changes her relationships most dramatically. She stops abandoning herself to keep the peace. This one can be difficult to recognize, because self-abandonment often looks like being easygoing. You don't say what bothered you. You pretend something didn't hurt. You accept the apology, even though nothing changes. You tell yourself it's not worth an argument. So you swallow the feeling again and again, until eventually there is peace in the relationship, but war inside you. Jung believed that what we refuse to acknowledge does not simply disappear. It often moves into what he called the shadow. Anger you aren't allowed to express. Needs you've learned to suppress. Ambition you've been taught to minimize. The part of you that wants to say, enough. When these parts are repeatedly rejected, they don't vanish. They emerge in resentment, exhaustion, anxiety, sudden anger, or the strange feeling that you no longer recognize your own life. The queen mindset does something radically different. She listens. If something hurts, she notices. If something feels wrong, she investigates. If resentment keeps appearing, she asks what boundary has been crossed. She does not worship conflict, but she no longer worships peace at the expense of truth either. Because she understands something important. A relationship that requires you to betray yourself in order to preserve it is already costing too much. Sometimes growth isn't learning how to tolerate more. Sometimes growth is realizing you were never supposed to tolerate it in the first place. And then we arrive at the fifth thing, perhaps the most important shift of all. She stops giving unlimited access to people who haven't earned it. A woman developing a queen mindset becomes intentional about access. Access to her time, her emotional energy, her body, her attention, her vulnerability, her home, her dreams, her inner world. She realizes these things are valuable, and valuable things are not automatically available to everyone who asks for them. This doesn't mean she becomes guarded or suspicious of everyone. It means she develops discernment. Because there is a difference between having walls and having doors. Walls keep everyone out. Doors allow you to decide who enters. The queen has doors. And she watches what people do once they are invited inside. Do they respect the space? Do they reciprocate? Do they protect what she reveals? Do they bring peace, honesty, and integrity? Or do they repeatedly consume her energy while offering very little in return? The old version of her may have believed that withdrawing access was punishment. The new version understands that sometimes it is simply consequence. If someone repeatedly disrespects her, they receive less access. If someone repeatedly violates her trust, they receive less access. If someone only appears when they need something, they receive less access. Not because she hates them, because she finally values herself. And that may be one of the clearest signs of individuation. You stop organizing your life around who might leave if you change, and begin organizing it around who you are becoming. But there is one final distinction that matters. A queen mindset does not mean I am better than everyone. That is not sovereignty. That is insecurity wearing a crown. True psychological sovereignty does not require an audience. It doesn't need to dominate. It doesn't need to humiliate people. It doesn't need everyone who rejected you to regret it. The deepest transformation happens when you no longer require revenge to validate your growth. You simply become unavailable for the patterns that once controlled you. You stop auditioning. You stop over-explaining. You stop confusing attention with devotion. You stop abandoning yourself to keep the peace. And you stop giving unlimited access to people who haven't earned it. And slowly, almost without noticing, your life begins to reorganize around your self-respect. Different people are attracted to you. Different behavior becomes acceptable to you. Different opportunities become visible, not because the universe suddenly decided you were worthy, but because you stopped participating in what required you to forget that you already were. Perhaps that is the real queen mindset. Not a crown, not an attitude, not superiority, but a woman who has become the authority within her own life. And once she reaches that point, she doesn't need to announce that she's changed. You can see it in everything she no longer does.